Introducing Punchbowl News. From Anna Palmer, Jake Sherman, and John Bresnahan. News about the people who matter, for the people who matter. Join the community at punchbowl.news.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Palmer, founder and CEO of Punchbowl News. We are thrilled today to have you join us for this important conversation. We are partnering with the American Investment Council to bring this conversation to life, featuring Senator Tom Carper, the Democrat from Delaware, about the role private capital can play.
I like the way you said that. The Democrat from Delaware.
Yes.
Instead of that other guy.
Exactly. We'll talk about him later, though. Don't worry.
There you go.
All right, so we're going to talk about what's happening in the news today, which is no shortage of that, as well as the role private capital is playing in combating climate change. This is part of our two-part series in Investing in America. Following that conversation, I'm going to be hosting a fireside chat with AIC's CEO, Drew Maloney, and Steve Luker, CEO of Catalyze. As always, we encourage you to share your thoughts about this conversation on social media. You can find us on all platforms at Punchbowl News. And of course, subscribe to our free morning newsletter at punchbowl.news. Before we get started, though, we're going to see a quick video from AIC, and we'll see you on the other side.
Did you know that private equity funded half of all private renewable investments in America last year, supporting solar, wind, and hydroelectric power, which are critical for the fight against climate change? Private equity, powering a cleaner, healthier planet.
All right. And with that, I'd like to welcome Senator Tom Carper. Senator, thank you so much for joining me on a very busy day.
Oh, no, you just woke me up from my nap. Nothing going on here.
All right. Well, we are here to focus on climate and some of the discussion around infrastructure, reconciliation. But before we do, I do have a few news of the day questions. We are coming precariously close to defaulting on the debt limit. We reported earlier today that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell was planning to offer Senate Democrats a short-term debt ceiling increase package or potentially an expedited reconciliation process. Where do you stand on these two new offers? I mean, October 18th is coming very fast.
First office I was ever elected to on was state treasurer. I was 29. And Pete DuPont was elected governor that year. And 2 months later, he gave his first State of the State address. He announced Delaware was bankrupt. And we ended up with the worst credit rating in the country. It took us 25 years to climb out of that hole and finally to reach AAA credit ratings, which we still enjoy. It cost us millions of dollars in debt service. It's a bad, stupid thing for us to have done. And we have to be smarter than that. We have the opportunity, I think, to negotiate our way to a good conclusion. I like to say, find out what works, do more of that. And I think in 2004, 2006, we're in a similar situation. And Democrats basically said, we're not going to insist on a supermajority vote, a 60 vote margin vote to go to the to legislation on raising the debt ceiling. I think we ought to take a page out of that book and see if we can't modify it and use it right here. Again, find out what works, do more of that. And it worked in 2004 and again in 2006. And in those times, the Republicans ended up furnishing, I think, all the votes for raising the debt ceiling.
There's been some reporting that these new offers are coming because McConnell is concerned about the pressure on senators like Joe Manchin on getting rid of the filibuster. Would you support getting rid of the filibuster to say just being allowed to raise the debt limit with that 50 vote threshold?
Yeah, I've been reluctant to want to modify and change the filibuster, and a lot of people I came and initially served with in the Senate felt that way as well, still feel that way. I like to say, be careful the bed you make, because you may get a chance to sleep in that bed. There are a couple of exceptions I would be willing to do. I don't want us to default on a debt, and I would waive the filibuster, or at least suspend the filibuster for a period of time so that we could make sure that we don't default on a debt. And the other thing is I find profoundly troubling is what's going on in terms of allowing people to vote, to register to vote, and to vote. I just think what we're witnessing on the other side there is just was awful. And at some point in time, I think I see that as a threat to our democracy as we know it. And that's probably something that will qualify as well.
All right. The other big issue in Washington going on right now is obviously the bipartisan infrastructure package and reconciliation. There has been some negotiations going on between the progressives and the more moderates in the House and Senate. Senator Joe Manchin has said that the highest he's willing to go is about $1.5 trillion. Right now, that ceiling is that $3 trillion. Where do you think Democrats are going to come down on this? Are you going to be able to pass both of those things?
Yeah, it's important. I have the pleasure of leading the Committee on Environment and Public Works with Shelley Capitol, West Virginia. Our legislation provided the foundation on which the bipartisan infrastructure bill is built. So a lot of good there, a lot of good for our economy, roads, highways, bridges, climate change, drinking water, you name it. And I don't want to waste the opportunity to get that done. We got to get that done. We've passed it with a bipartisan majority in the Senate. It's over in the House. I hope and pray they will pass it as well. Let me just take this in a little bit of a different direction. I'm a glass half full guy. One of my guiding principles in life is Albert Einstein. I'm certainly not smart as he was by any stretch of the imagination, but he used to say, in adversity lies opportunity. In adversity lies opportunity. We face huge adversity right now in terms of our finances and managing our economy and threats to our democracy. We also face huge threats with respect to climate change and global warming. But in the midst of those threats and that from climate change and crazy extreme weather, are the ability to create economic opportunity in jobs in this country and to meet that threat and to provide just a great payoff for American workers and American companies.
Well, let's talk about climate. That's why we are here today. You're a senior member, as you mentioned, of the Senate Finance Committee and chairman of the Environmental Public Works Committee. Can you talk kind of broadly about how you see the impact the infrastructure bill would make on the efforts to combat climate change and reduce our nation's carbon emissions?
Sure. Mary Barra, you may know, a woman you may know who now is the CEO of General Motors and a remarkable leader in her own right. But anyway, a year ago I called her. I was trying to convince General Motors to join 5 other companies in reaching an agreement with California and a bunch of other states, including Delaware, to require newly produced vehicles to meet ever more stringent greenhouse gas emissions requirements. And she said to me a year ago, she said, and I'm all in on electric. This is what she said. I'm all in on electric. That's the future. That's where we need to go. She was not willing to take the risk that coming up on a position, a direct opposition to Donald Trump. But she said, she said she wanted to see there's 3 things that need to happen before people will buy the electric vehicles that we're going to build. And I said, what are those? She said, the first thing we need is 300-mile range on charges. That's what we need. She said, second thing we need is the ability to charge batteries in minutes, not hours. The third thing she said we need are charging stations and fueling stations, not just for electric vehicles, but for hydrogen-powered vehicles. She said the first 2 are on us, 300-mile change on us, the industry, and on the ability to charge within minutes, not hours. She said the next part is we're not going to build, the industry's not going to build the charging stations for electric vehicles or the hydrogen fueling stations. He said that has to be largely a government effort. As it turns out, what we're trying to do, and I think we're beginning to do that, is we have some money in the reconciliation bill, but in the infrastructure bill, it actually does build a lot of charging stations for electric vehicles and fueling stations for electric powered vehicles along federal highways. And we also provide in our tax legislation, it's in a separate package, investment tax credits. So we incentivize businesses to invest their money. And to the extent that they do that, we provide tax credits to help buy down their out-of-pocket expenses. So it's a partnership. It's not just all in the federal government. It's not just all direct payout in the federal government. A lot of its incentives include investment tax credits and something we call production tax credits. The other sleeper in all of this is hydrogen. There's been a huge focus on electric for vehicles and so forth. But the 3 major sources of carbon emissions on our planet, number one, are vehicles. That's number one. The vehicles we drive, roads, on cars, trucks, and vans. Second, great source is power plants, creating electricity power plants. The third one is the buildings and all that we live in the industries we have. So what we're endeavoring to do is to address all of those, and to do that in very, very smart ways. Hydrogen, clean hydrogen is going to be a big deal with respect to mid-sized trucks, big trucks. It's going to be a big deal to bring down carbon emissions in the industry.
Yeah, so you talk about that, right? It's the role, you're obviously focused on what Congress and government can do to maybe make it a little bit easier or make the private sector be able to have those opportunities. But can you talk about that, the role that the private sector and private equity in particular is playing, if this infrastructure bill does pass? That, I mean, it sounds as though you think that there could all of a sudden be a lot of investment that otherwise has been, either inhibited by taxes or different kind of things to actually get into the marketplace.
Now, there's a company, it's Tennessee-based company, it's called Pilot. They own hundreds and hundreds of truck stops all over the country. And they're interesting. They think that part of their business model going forward could be charging stations for, fueling stations for hydrogen-powered trucks, charging stations for hydrogen-powered, electric-powered trucks. And they're not willing to just put all the money out themselves for that. But if we're willing to provide an investment tax credit, maybe 30% to buy down the cost by 30%, they're going to be all in. And that will stretch our federal dollars. It'll give them an opportunity to make money and to sort of modify their business model going forward in ways that they think are advantageous.
When you talk about these kind of tax credits, is this one of those areas? I mean, right now there's a few places where Republicans and Democrats are coming together. Is this one of those places where you've been able to get some traction with your Republican colleagues?
Oh yeah. If all we do is talk about the climate change is something that we've got to do because the planet's on fire and heaven help us. If that's all we do. We're probably going to have a hard time getting any kind of traction with the other side. If we focus on the planet's on fire, we got to do something about it. And by the way, we can do so and create jobs and economic opportunity, and make sure that our vehicles that we build, our cars, our trucks, our vans are going to be competitive in the world marketplace, to make sure that our air conditioners and our refrigerators and all that stuff will be competitive in the world marketplace. And that sells to both sides. And frankly, organized labor likes it as well, because we're talking about creating good paying jobs, whether they're building infrastructure or modern vehicles and modern trucks, and that are good for the climate and good for economic opportunity.
Project out a little bit. Are there other things that need to be done? We've talked about some of the tax credits, some of the other provisions that you're thinking about when it comes to, increasing investment by the private sector. But are there other policies that we should be looking down the pike that can maybe make those investments in clean energy like solar, carbon capture, battery storage easier or more, where you see more actual investment happening in those areas?
I can barely spell, and I can barely spell periodic table. The idea that I know much about chemistry, I think I got a C, maybe a B in chemistry, but H2, hydrogen. As it turns out, hydrogen is going to be a key toward reducing emissions from mid-sized trucks and large trucks. And it's going to be a key toward reducing emissions from our manufacturing sector. Think like cement plants. Hydrogen can be created from sources that create a lot of carbon dioxide, or hydrogen can be created in a clean way. It doesn't make our problems with carbon dioxide worse. There's a technology called electrolysis, where we use electricity in water, H2O, and in order to create hydrogen, and separately to create oxygen. The oxygen can be used for a number of purposes. The hydrogen can be used for industry, can be used for moving cars, trucks, and vans. This is game changing, and we've introduced legislation that creates something called production tax credits and investment tax credits for hydrogen. That will be a game changer for the industry, and whether it has to be on cars, trucks, and vans, frankly, in housing, and also in manufacturing. That is something that's just over the horizon, but not far over the horizon. And we have the opportunity. The key here is not just to do a tax revision for 6 months or 12 months and say, well, maybe we'll extend it beyond that. We have to provide certainty and predictability for a longer period of time. That's what businesses need, certainty and predictability. And we have to make sure that we're doing that with our tax, whether it's investment tax credits or production tax credits.
You're more well versed with the periodic table than I am in my most recent days. Before we let you run here, and we're quickly running out of time, I know it's a busy time, but I do want to ask you. Obviously, have a close personal relationship with President Joe Biden. He's from your home.
Joe Biden from Delaware.
I mean, I hope you know him. Can you talk a little bit about that? How often you're speaking with him? I know you've worked on some issues like immigration. What's his mind share like right now?
I talked to him, I'll be honest with you, and what is this? This is today's, it's like the 6th. I haven't talked to him for a week. And he gave me a call. I shouldn't be saying this, but he gave me a call just to talk things through where we are. And with respect to how do we find a way to, so that we can complete the work on our infrastructure legislation, which would be a good thing, not just for climate, but a good thing for jobs. But how to get to yes, and to help. Joe, I'm from West Virginia. Joe Manchin's from West Virginia, and we are pretty good friends. And so I'm trying to play a constructive role, as I think all of us are, so that we can get to where we need to be. I've said for months now, there's a number between $0 and $3.5 trillion in terms of a reconciliation package to go along with our $1 trillion infrastructure. There's a number between 0 and 3.5. I think it's right around 2. And urging both sides, the progressive folks and the folks that are more moderate or conservative folks, we've got to gather around it. The worst, we cannot fail here. We cannot fail here. And the president understands that. He's a very good negotiator, and he's very good at getting people to sit down and come to agreement. He's negotiated with Mitch McConnell, Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond. I mean, if you can negotiate with those people, maybe you can negotiate with our friend Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Maybe you can. I think so.
Well, yeah. What was your piece of advice to him when he was asking for it?
Don't give up. Continue to be involved. Continue to make it clear that we've made a number of principled compromises. Lest failure is not an option. Don't give up.
All right, Senator. We appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks. Nice to see you.
You too. All right. And with that, we are going to have a short video from AIC. And on the flip side, we will start our fireside chat.
Private equity means to me financial hope for families to receive services they need for their children with autism. There was a moment where I stopped and just noticed we are here. Our son is sitting there, we're actually enjoying the meal, and this is going really well. It was a moment where I literally had tears going down my face. My name is Esperanza Reyes, and my son received services through ABS Kids. This is private equity.
All right. And with that, let's welcome Drew Maloney, AIC's CEO, and Stephen Luker, founder of Catalyst, to the stage. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
Of course. All right. Drew, I'm going to start off with you. We just heard a lot from Senator Carper on a lot of different things, but clearly the news of the day right now is trying to find a path forward on the debt ceiling, raising the debt limit. October 18th is becoming scarily close, as we have reported on quite a bit. But what are you hearing from your members, the private equity industry? I assume there's a lot of nervousness here.
Well, I think we always believe that Congress will figure out a solution to this. It feels like, every so many years that we have to address these debt ceiling issues. And I'm confident that they'll find a solution, and hopefully we can get onto a bipartisan infrastructure bill, very similar to what Senator Carper talked about during the interview.
Yeah, Senator Carper said at the end, failure is not an option. That was his words of advice to President Joe Biden. What would this legislation mean, Drew, to the private equity industry?
Well, I think what's important, and what Senator Carper said, was that the government can't achieve the climate issues and deal with the climate issues alone. It needs partnership with the private sector. And I think at private equity, we're proud to play a critical role in that partnership and create many new green jobs around the country and help achieve cleaner air and water for everyone around us. Just last year alone, if you think about the funding sources and technology development, private equity contributed $24 billion in renewable energy projects. That is half of all the private sector dollars that went into renewable energy last year. And maybe just to sort of set the table for Steve and his company Catalyst, I'm sitting in a private equity backed Brookfield Properties building here in Washington, D.C. And this building has solar power on the roof. It's LEED certified. We have EV charging stations in the basement and, temperature controlled inside. I mean, we are leading these innovations, and we are doing our part to try to improve the carbon footprint in the country.
That's a great segue here. Steve, let's turn it over to you for a second. For our audience that isn't familiar with Catalyst, can you give us a little background on what your company does in the green energy space?
Sure, absolutely. So Catalyze is a renewable energy utility, basically. We focus on the commercial and industrial sector. To Drew's point, we provide energy assets to those customers at their sites, and we help monetize the value of those assets, and we share the revenue with those customers. So we operate across multiple states. We have projects under construction from Maine to California, and it's all private equity backed at this point. I think to Drew's point and the senator's point, the predictability is a key issue here, and private equity's role is really key in helping companies like Catalyze mature, grow their processes. The renewable energy industry is fairly new and is emerging, and you heard the senator talk about hydrogen technology and a lot of technologies that aren't off the shelf. You can't go to Home Depot and buy one of these things. So you have to have companies like NCAP, our sponsor in the private equity space, that has both the domain expertise, long history in energy and energy transition, and those key individuals contributing their decades of knowledge to help companies like ours mature and really be ready for that next level, which is very predictable. It's kind of what the public markets and investors like to see: predictable, mature, repeatable, scalable businesses.
We hear a lot about jobs here in Washington and whether legislation is going to create it or not. Certainly the renewable energy industry is a growing area, and particularly if this bipartisan infrastructure bill passes, there's a lot of talk about what kind of jobs, particularly union jobs, that the senator pointed out as well could be in this industry. Can you talk about the impact of green jobs that you're seeing in your own sector, in your own company?
Absolutely. So we pull in labor from multiple sources. We do retraining from utilities. A lot of our employees are former utility company employees who want to move into this transition space. We work with unions, the trades organizations. About 70% of our labor, that's the construction labor on projects, comes from the unions. So it's a good, as the senator mentioned, it's a benefit to the trades. It's also a benefit to retraining and repurposing of, call it conventional utility workers to come into the renewable energy space. Now we even take that one step farther, and we focus on hiring veterans and minorities, and we have a very structured veteran-friendly program. Up to about 80% of our labor force in the subcontractors are either veterans or minorities. So we are really focusing on retraining of the workforce.
Drew, we heard from Senator Carper about some of his efforts to make it easier for the investment community, whether the couple of different tax provisions that he's super focused on, that, I think he and other members feel like are going to be able to help companies make big plays in the green energy space. You talked a little bit about just the role that private equity is playing right now in terms of that growing portfolio. The numbers that I saw were pretty stunning, right? Private equity contributed nearly $24 billion. That's B with a billion in renewable energy companies in the last year. Can you talk about that growing trend of the portfolio and where you kind of project that going forward?
Well, I think it's been a remarkable amount of investment that you've seen last year. And I think we're going to continue to see that as we, go through this energy transition. The technologies are developing very quickly. They require a lot of capital. And, and I think that what's unique about the private sector is that they have the ability to be nimble and drive this technology. And what we need is just, and I think the bipartisan infrastructure bill helps set the policy stage to allow this to flourish. I just think you have to be careful that while you're supporting this type of investment through an infrastructure bill, that you don't shift in a reconciliation bill and then discourage it by increasing taxes on that type of investment. So I think it's a really careful balancing act as we go forward, because we're going to need a lot of capital There's going to be a lot of government policies as we go through this next 50 years of energy transition.
Yeah, let's talk about that just for 1 second, because you talk about that there's a lot of what's in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that folks like. But then when it comes to reconciliation, to your point, raising taxes, different things, is there one thing that you're most concerned about that might be in reconciliation, or that you think that they should rethink as it goes forward through this kind of tough negotiation process over the next couple of weeks and months?
Well, obviously we invest a lot of capital, and when we invest capital, we take something called a profit interest or a carry. So if the investment is successful, our partners, capture 20% of the upside. If it's not successful, we get zero. So what we've normally done, and what's been done for about 100 years, is that 20% profit interest is treated with capital gains treatment. The bill already raises capital gains from 20% to 25%, at least in the draft. In the draft, it also goes further than that, and then would require a 5-year holding period for all private equity investment. And within that period, it would increase the taxes to 39.6%. So that's a 98% tax increase on this type of investment. And I think what we're trying to do now is we're trying to get the economy back up and going. We're trying to encourage these new investments. We're trying to encourage innovation. And I think while we're doing that, we should not be increasing taxes on that specific segment. We need to be encouraging people to spend the money, and we have to achieve this, energy transition. And the only way we're going to do that is with private capital dollars.
All right. Thank you so much. And Steve, before we let you all go, I just want to ask you, we're in Washington here. If there was one thing, you're an entrepreneur, you're on the ground, you've got this investment, you've worked with private equity. Is there one kind of top line thing that you wish people in Washington would know about kind of either business or about how this kind of process works, particularly when it comes to a green business like yours?
Yeah, I think it's going back to what the senator said. It's really a negotiation between the public and the private side. I think that government does play a very strong role in risk reduction, which is really what we're talking about through tax credits or other mechanisms. The transportation and the electric industries don't have the luxury that DoD, the defense industry, has. I worked in DoD for many years, and there's a healthy budget there to reduce risk around emerging technologies and capabilities. And I think it's that combination of understanding that, yes, it's not a subsidy. It's just risk reduction for what Drew said. It's a transition over 50 years. We're not about to flip a switch and move from hydrocarbon one day to hydrogen or electric the next day. It leaves too many people behind. So we have to really be deliberate and extremely mindful of breaking things at work, as we go forward. So that partnership is key. The other thing that Drew mentioned, the policy, investors tend to line up around policy. So making sure we really think through the policy, the short and the long-term impacts, because if the investment incentives aren't there, then the math's not there to support the investment. So we have to really think through those longer-term objectives and then apply it to a near-term execution strategy.
All right. Well, Steve, Drew, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining me for this fireside chat. A big thank you to AIC in general for partnering with us on this 2-part series, Investing in America. We appreciate Senator Carper for joining as well. And thank all of you for joining us on the live stream today. We will be back soon with more Punchbowl News programming. Stay tuned. Have a safe day. We'll talk soon. Thanks.